Okay, so I'm very happy to introduce today Primavera De Filippi. Primavera was a researcher at the European University Institute a few years ago under my supervision. And after that, she has been, I must say, hugely successful. She has become now Director of Research at the National Center of Scientific Research, the CNRS, in Paris. And she's faculty associate at the Berkham Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard. And she's also now come back, at least partially, at the UI as visiting fellow at the Robert Schuman Center for Advanced Studies at the European University Institute. Primavera has been a leading researcher in the domain of blockchain technology and now merging with artificial intelligence. And she has played a key role, I would say, on enabling us to understand the opportunities that are offered by the blockchain and the new governance opportunities that can be based on that technology. So without further ado, I'm very happy to now to give the floor to Primavera for her presentation. Thank you very much, Primavera, for being with us.
Thank you. Yeah, so this presentation is so my research is usually about the legal and governance questions of blockchain technology, and I'm currently leading this ERC project, which is looking at what are the opportunities that blockchain technology provides when it is adopted within existing communities and organizations, and in particular existing institutional frameworks. And so here, this presentation is actually focusing specifically on the question of the extent to which blockchain technology can be leveraged in the educational sector, and what are the various properties that that can be used in order to improve transparency, accountability, and potentially interoperability within educational records. So I will start, unless you tell me not to, depending on the audience. I can start with a short introduction about the specific technical features of blockchain technology, just so that everyone is on the same page, unless you think that will be redundant, because most people in the audience are actually already acquainted with that. What do you think?
Okay. It's always great to start with some introduction. At least I would vote for introductory remarks before we advance to more complex things. I see Nicola as well. So
yeah. Okay, and yeah, please stop me at any point, because I think it's more interesting to have like a interactive discussion. Anyways, so it's a short introduction to blockchain technology. Basically, yeah, perhaps an interesting way to provide this, the analogy with the internet, where essentially we have the possibility to bypass existing intermediaries, such as newspapers and TV broadcasts and all the internet that we used to rely on in order to communicate with one another. And in particular, with the advent of peer-to-peer file sharing network, we now have the possibility of transferring files directly with one another. And this is great when it comes to exchanging information, knowledge, and so forth. But of course, it can be quite problematic when it comes to exchanging money or any other type of resource which whose value comes from its scarcity. And so today, when we want to exchange money on the internet, we generally rely on intermediary operators, whether those are banks or PayPal or whatever else, which are responsible for verifying every transactions and ensuring that no one is spending more money than what they actually have. And of course, the problem with this model is that this introduces a new layer of centralization over the internet, and therefore the system only works so far as we can trust those intermediaries. And so then comes Bitcoin, which tries to provide an answer to this question, basically how to create a decentralized payment system that does not rely on any financial intermediaries or any trusted operators. And so the idea with Bitcoin, I'm not gonna go too much in that, but is to create a system in which it is possible to actually exchange value. And the usual problem that we encounter in a decentralized system, of course, is the double spending problem. And Bitcoin is the first application that address this double spending problem. Doesn't actually solve it, but finds some mechanism, which is mostly an economic incentive mechanism, in order to reduce in a significant manner the probability that people will double spend. And so how does it work? It works mostly of the process by and extracted from the ground, but also as time passes and the reserve of gold gets depleted, then it becomes harder and harder to find new gold. And so in the same way with Bitcoin, the principle is similar, meaning that are created by having doing work, where work is attempting to find a solution to a particular mathematical problem. And this mathematical problem, the difficulty increases with the network size. And that means that the more people are connected and are contributing their own computing resources to the network, then the harder it becomes to generate a new Bitcoin. And then the problem that needs to be solved is essentially just like finding this number. And it's a number that when passing a particular block through a hash function, when adding that number to the block, then the result will be inferior to, so the result of the hashing will be inferior to a particular number. And the goal is that every 10 minutes, this number is found by someone statistically. And if too many people find if it happens too fast, if people find the answer to this problem too fast, then the difficulty will increase. Whereas if there is more than 10 minutes in which people are not managing to find a solution to this problem, then the difficulty will decrease, so that in average, every 10 minutes, there is a new block that is created, and whoever has expanded the work to find this number will be rewarded with a particular amount of Bitcoin, and that's how Bitcoins are generated. And so today, every 10 minutes, there is a block, and every 10 minutes, there is 6 Bitcoins that are granted to the producer of this block. Now the question is, because it is nonetheless a virtual currency, then how can we trust the system, and how can we ensure that people cannot replicate Bitcoins in the same way as people can replicate digital content on the internet? And so blockchain technology actually is designed specifically to do that, to prevent anyone from being able to reproducing Bitcoin and therefore double spending on the network, while maintaining a completely decentralized system. So the way it works is that instead of delegating the task of verifying the transaction to a centralized operator, in the context of Bitcoin, the history of all the transactions are stored on a common database, that is the blockchain. And this database is shared amongst all the network participants. And it is all the network participants that contribute to the verification and to the validation of the transaction. And so because every single node in the network holds the full copy of the blockchain, then it is virtually impossible to cheat, because if someone were to try to make an operation that is invalid, that doesn't fulfill the mathematical guarantees of the blockchain, then this transaction will be immediately detected as a fraudulent transaction, and it will be rejected by the rest of the network. And then once the block has been validated, it is incorporated with the rest of the chain. And the important particularity is that every block incorporates the hash, so a reference to the previous block. And this reference is actually part of the same mathematical problem that is part of the mining process. And so this means that by looking at the blockchain, you can always trace one block after the other, but it also means that if a single one of the transaction is modified, it will actually change this reference, because the reference is the fingerprint of the block. And so by changing a single transaction in any blocks, it's gonna modify the reference, and therefore it's gonna break the chain, because it means that the next block will no longer reference the previous block. And so you will need to change reference to the next block, but that means that you need to redo all the work of mining. And so the longer is the chain, then the more secure, the higher the number of blocks after a particular transaction, the more secure is that transaction, because it means that it will be extremely costly to modify this transaction, because it means that you need to mine all the blocks after the transaction that you're trying to modify, which today, given the size and the difficulty of the problem within Bitcoin, is almost impossible. So now, given those specific technological characteristics, we can see of what are the it differs from traditional online centralized platform. So the first one is the resiliency. So a blockchain is first of all a database that operates on a peer-to-peer network. And it is, of course, just like the internet is global and transnational, so it doesn't account for national boundaries, but also because a copy of the blockchain is stored on the computers of every network participant, then that makes the blockchain very resilient, because it's extremely difficult to shut down the network, because it is enough to have one single copy of the blockchain in order to replicate it and potentially bootstrap the network from scratch. So every single network participant holds the totality of the information that is necessary in order to operate the blockchain network. Secondly, there is the question of coercion and censor resistance. So as opposed to traditional online platforms where there is an online operator which has the possibility whenever they want to modify the code of the platform, and oftentimes this change can be done in the backend. And so users do not even know that a change has been made. And by connecting to the platform, they automatically comply with those changes. So the online operator can choose to change the rules at any time. This cannot be done on a blockchain infrastructure, because the client is actually run just by the network participant. And this means that any change in the protocol needs to be approved by every single network participant, which needs to upgrade their client in order to implement those changes. And then also the disintermediation inherent in the blockchain also makes it very difficult to censor content. And so again, as opposed to a centralized platform where the operator can choose which information gets on the platform and which one should be censored, in a blockchain, it's very difficult, because the mining process is done in a distributed manner. And so it is all the time at the actor that chooses which transaction will be included into a block. And so there is no single operator that has the possibility of choosing whether to censor specific transaction or not. That will require an actual collision of the majority of the network. And And then there is the question of immutability. So because of the way in which a blockchain is designed with this chain of blocks that reference each other, and because of the cryptographic primitives that are incorporated into the design for the hashing function, whenever information is added on a blockchain, it becomes virtually impossible to delete it or to modify it, because again, doing so will immediately be detected by the other network participant, and it will actually break, the referencing system on the blockchain. And so these, plus the addition of the fact that we recorded a timestamp, so it is always possible to trace back since the beginning, since the genesis of the blockchain, all the transaction. And so this creates a system that is very good for auditability, for traceability, and ex post verifiability. And then also because every transaction needs to be signed by the private key of the person that is recording it, this makes the system, but it creates like an authenticity. So I know that only that actor that executed the transaction actually could have done unless the private key was compromised. But also it creates some kind of no, because once the transaction has been recorded with my private key, I cannot claim that I have not executed such on the blockchain. While Bitcoin was created essentially for financial transactions, there is more modern blockchain, and which to record and to upload specific snippets of code on the blockchain, and this code can be executed again in a distributed manner by all the network participants, and therefore this code comes with a particular guarantee of execution in the sense that no operator has the possibility of terminating this code or even modifying its execution, as opposed to a centralized platform in which code can easily be stopped or influenced in its execution. And so essentially what this means is that we are moving away from a system which is based on trust, either because there needs to be trust between parties in order for those parties to act, or because there is no such trust, then we rely on those intermediary trusted authority, which are negating the interaction between parties that do not know each other and therefore do not trust each other. And so in the blockchain, we are moving into a system that replaces trust with proof and verifiability. And this is what we define commonly as a trustless technology, because everything that was related to trust is now verifiable mathematically or cryptography. And then, of course, we also need to be mindful that there is no such thing as a trustless system. There is always some specific trust somewhere, and trust is degree. And so different implementations will lead to different of trust or trustlessness. And so we can see this kind of continuum between the most public and permissionless blockchains like Bitcoin, which are highly decentralized and therefore come with a very of technological guarantees with regard to everything that was discussed before. Are very low degree of governability, which is kind of like a trade-off, because given the decentralization, it is extremely difficult to create a consensus about changing the rules or modifying specific sections of the blockchain. And this is why Bitcoin in particular is very difficult to amend or to upgrade. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, we have what we call the private by a small number of nodes, which often within the control of one or very few number of entities, which are actually very easily governable, because it's very easy to reach consensus and therefore to adapt the blockchain to the different needs. But of course, then they have a much lower degree of decentralization, and therefore the technological guarantees that they provide are weaker, because all the concept around immutability and non-censorability, of course, do not apply when all the nodes are controlled by a single actor. And then in between, we have all those hybrid systems, which are oftentimes referred to as consortium blockchain, which are kind of in the middle, and they can be closer or further from public and private, and they are generally controlled by a particular number of pre-identified actors, but sufficiently large so that it actually provides a sufficient degree of decentralization and therefore technological guarantees, but it also sufficiently, not homogeneous, but sufficiently identified the actors that if everyone agrees that there is something that needs to be modified because there was a bug or because there was a mistake somewhere, then it is possible. So it's kind of in between. It doesn't provide as many technological guarantees as a public and permissionless blockchain, but it's good enough. But it provides much greater degree of governability. And so depending on the type of application that we want to adopt, then it will justify adopting one type of blockchain or another type. There is no better or worse type. It's just some of them are more effective for specific applications. And so what are those applications? We can subdivide the application of blockchain technology into three macro categories. One is the use of blockchain as certified registries for the storing of data in a secure and decentralized manner. The other one is the use of blockchain technology for the issuance and the transfer of cryptocurrencies or other type of blockchain-based tokens. And then the third one, which is the more advanced one, is actually using those smart contracts, this next set of code that will execute specific condition with a guarantee of execution. And so I'm going to go over those various applications, and I'm going to focus in particular on the way in which they can be adopted in the field of education. So the first one is a certified registry. So because of all the properties and distinctive characteristics of the blockchain that we've seen before, a blockchain is a very powerful data set, which is transparent, which is tamper resistant, and which comes with this chronological order of events. And that makes it particularly useful for ensuring the integrity and the authenticity of data. Of course, there is always this important question about what is the data that we want to upload on a blockchain, because uploading data on the blockchain also means that everyone that has access to a copy of the blockchain will get access to all this data. And even like encrypting the data can be a problem, because if the encryption key gets compromised, then this information will be forever available on the blockchain. And so there is this, most of the time when we want to record data on the blockchain as a registry, we're not uploading data as such, because of course this can cause a lot of problems when we talk about confidential data or personal data and so forth. So it is usually bad practice to record personal data directly in raw format. Instead, most of the time, the data recorded on the blockchain is done via digital fingerprint or hashes. And so the way it works is that you can take any type of input, digital file or a database, and then pass it via this cryptographic function that is a hashing function. And this will generate a particular string of character as an output. And the particularity of this function is that every time you pass the same file, it will generate always the same exact string as an output. But as soon as you modify even as smallest bit of the input file, it will generate a completely different string as an output. And this cannot be predicted. what the output will be. And most importantly, it is a one-way function. This means that while you can always generate the string from the original file, the output cannot be used in order to extract or retrieve back the file. So it is different from traditional cryptography, in which you always have an encryption and a decryption process. So here the idea is really just to generate this fingerprint that becomes a unique identifier of the input data, and then you can record that on the blockchain. And this is a way of recording a proof that that particular file was intended to be referenced on the blockchain at that particular point in time. And so there is a variety of applications that emerge from that. The first one is in order to actually, like in the context, for instance, of cybersecurity, in order to ensure the integrity of information and verifying that it has not been modified, manipulated, or tampered with. And so, for instance, we have Time, which is specialized in these activities, which is also working, for instance, with the government of Estonia. And what they do is that they work with a specific institution in order to protect their critical infrastructure. And so every time a database is being updated, they will create a hash of the current state of the database, and they will record it on a blockchain-based infrastructure. And this means that every time someone wants to access information from this database, they will first collect, recalculate the hash of the database and compare it with the hash that has been recorded on the blockchain. And if it is the same, it means that we can be sure that there has been no manipulation whatsoever on the data. Whereas if the hash is different, it means that someone has changed the data, and therefore the data that has been retrieved should not be trusted. And then another application that is very commonly used is the proof of existence, which is using the hashes, recording the hash of a file on a blockchain as a way of proving that that particular file existed and was in possession of whoever has executed this transaction at the particular point in time in which the block has been recorded. Simply because no one could have generated this digital fingerprint if they didn't have the possession of the file to begin with. And then this property has been used in various fields, most importantly in the notarization context. So because of those properties, it becomes possible by recording the hash of digital content on a particular blockchain infrastructure to prove that this document, this contract, or whatever has existed at that particular point in time. Estonia is using this technology as well in order to enable all of its electronic residents to rely on blockchain-based system in order to notarize specific documents that they can record birth certificate, marriages, and so forth. But then there is also other types of applications such as intellectual property, so the possibility of recording information in order to then later on be able to claim priority. So if I'm an artist or if I'm an inventor, I can record the hash of a particular document on the blockchain, and without disclosing any of the information that is inside the document. And then after a few months or a few years, if I need to prove that I was in possession or that I created this document at that time, I can then show the original file and then hash it and compare it with the original hash. And that means that only if I possess this file, I could have created that transaction. And then similarly, we have like within the more governmental system, we have like a few proof of concept that have been emerged, oftentimes like mostly in countries of Africa, where there is a lot of alleged corruption and mismanagement in the land registries. And again, the idea here is to create a digital twin, a digital backup of the land registry, and record every transaction both on the official land registry and on the blockchain-based one, so that when there is, if there is any discrepancy between the two, then one can be sure that the one on the blockchain could not have been tampered with, and therefore the problem must be on the official land registry. And then perhaps more directly relevant with education is the use of blockchain technology in order to issue specific credentials or certifications. And so we have a few universities that are already experimenting with that. The MIT Media Lab was the first one that started issuing some blockchain-based diploma. And then also in France and in Greece, we have a few universities that are also starting to do that. And the idea here is really just to rely on this blockchain-based infrastructure in order to issue digital diploma that cannot be forged. And so reducing, therefore, the probability of academic fraud. And so here is a little example of a little schematic overview of how it could work. So we have a student that just graduated from school, and so she will receive a digital assigned certificate in digital format that was signed by the school, and then at the same time the school will record the hash of the certificate on the blockchain. And then when the student wants to go to another school, she wants to enroll to college or university, she will only need to show that digital certificate to the university, and then instead of going back and contacting the original issuer, the school, the university will be able to just verify the legitimacy of this document by comparing the hash of the document that they have received with the hash that has been recorded on the blockchain. And if that hash was executed and signed by the key of the school, then it means that it's an original diploma. And so these enable a more decentralized system of verification of academic credential and diplomas, which also work if, for instance, the original issuer is no longer available, if the institution has gone out of business, if they have lost their record, and so forth. It will always be possible as long as there is one copy of this digital certificate that is available, it will always be possible to verify that it is indeed a legitimate diploma. And then we have like more granular applications. So again, with MIT in collaboration with the Digital Currency Initiative and the company BlockCert, which has started to issue those badges, not necessarily for the final diplomas, but really just as a way of verifying that a particular student has reached a particular achievement because they have followed a particular course, because they have acquired a particular skill set, and so forth. And so MIT was already using those badges, but now they are actually integrating them with a blockchain-based infrastructure so that the verification of those badges can be done without having all the time to contact whoever professors or whoever was responsible for the issuance of those badges, so to facilitate the verifiability of those. And more generally, this whole model can be abstracted to a more general system of credential management for education and beyond, where we can use those type of blockchain-based attestations and credentials in order to issue and verify academic credential, professional certification, or any types of records that can contribute to the curricula of a particular student. And the benefit of this is that once one has acquired those attestation or those credentials, they can then use them, as long as they are issued by a trustworthy party, they can use them in order to interact with a variety of other parties, which, as long as they trust the source, then they will not need to ask any additional information. They will not need to verify again and ask the student to send all their grades and diploma. They just know that if this credential has been issued, it means that someone else has already done the verification job. And so by analogy, we can look at the analogy, for instance, of the festival, where in order to buy a ticket, I oftentimes need to provide a lot of information, including my name, my last name, sometimes my date of birth, my nationality, and so forth. But then once I reach the festival ground and I give my ticket, I receive a bracelet. And this bracelet can have different colors or different styles, which are indicative of which kind of credentials I have, what is my status. So it could be like I could be a volunteer, I can be a staff, I can be a VIP member, and so forth. And then whenever I'm walking by into the festival, no one needs to ask me any additional information, because by just looking at the bracelet, they know whether I can access a particular place, whether I can benefit from specific services or not. And so as long as they trust that this is not a false bracelet, then the verification was done just once, and it doesn't need to be done all the time at every time I'm interacting with a new actor. And so in the same way, when we move into the context of blockchain-based verified credential, the principle is the same. There is the original issuer, which will most likely need to collect a lot of information. Maybe it's like it's a school which will collect all the grades of the student, or which should ask all the relevant information in order to be able to issue a particular credential. But then once this credential has been given to the student and has been recorded on the blockchain, then it becomes an entry point for interacting with a variety of other actors that only need to verify the trustworthiness of this claim, but do not have to either contact the original issuer or do not have to recollect the same information that has already been collected once. And so this falls within the broader concept of what we call self-sovereign identity, which is the idea that today our current model of identity management is quite problematic, because every time we interact with a new operator, we need to re-authenticate ourselves. We need to re-communicate all the information that are necessary for connecting or for interacting with this operator. And this information is then stored and replicated on a large number of servers. And every time I want to interact with a new actor, I need again to re-communicate and redisclose my personal information. And this also limits the portability of the data, because the user is not in control of the data that is owned by those online operators. And when we move into the self-sovereign identity model, it's almost like a flip side, meaning that the user actually holds all those certificates, and whenever they need to collect a new certificate, they will choose which one out of all the operator that are at my disposal, which one do I trust with that particular type of data. So if I need to prove, for instance, that I am older than 18, I will disclose my date of birth and my passport to one particular operator which I trust, and this operator will then issue in exchange some credential that is, or an attestation that I am indeed an adult. And then from then on, I only need to disclose this attestation to the various operator, and I never need to disclose my passport or my date of birth to the authors. So I can have a more selective disclosure, and I really pick the operator that I trust information with, but then I collect all those credentials that I can reuse, and as long, of course, as the issuer of the credential is trusted, then other operators will be able to rely upon this information. And so this means, on the one hand, that there is less disclosure of information, but also that there is more portability, because I can easily move from one platform to the other without having to download and re-upload all the data from one place to the other. Okay, then the second big category is tokenization. So beyond certified registry, blockchain also, of course, like enable the possibility of issuing those blockchain-based tokens. So the most common one is, of course, cryptocurrencies with Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all the millions of cryptocurrencies that have emerged afterwards. But then there is also those additional tokens that can be emitted on top of an existing blockchain, which are not native to it's not cryptocurrency native, but it enables different applications to create their own tokens. And so it's kind of similar to if I go to a casino and I need to change money into tokens, and then I use those tokens to play, and then I can redeem them for the money. So here it's the same thing, like there are some applications that require, in order to interact with them, the user to collect specific types of tokens that they are issuing. And this is a precondition in order to be able to interact with those applications. And then you probably have heard about this because it's very popular in the last few months. So we have those non-fungible tokens, which are different from the traditional cryptocurrency or other blockchain-based token, because as opposed to one Bitcoin being equivalent to a Bitcoin in the same way as €1 is equivalent to another euro, those NFTs tokens are not interchangeable, so they are all unique. And they all have distinctive properties that enable them to distinguish them one from the other. And those tokens have become very popular in recent years because the art world has identified the benefits, the potential that they provide, especially for digital artists, which for the first time in history perhaps have now the possibility of creating unique and scarce and authentic copies of their digital works. And of course, this has been immediately identified by the art market, which has jumped on the opportunity. And so we have those digital copies, which sells for several millions and billions of dollars. But beyond the art world, this technology, NFTs, can be extremely useful also in many other sectors. And one protocol that is becoming very popular in the recent months, years, is the proof of attendance protocol, which currently is mostly used in the context of blockchain conference and workshop, but it's actually acquiring, it's gaining popularity also outside of the blockchain world. And here the idea is to use NFTs, to issue NFT to whoever is attending a particular event. And this create a proof later on that I was there at that particular point in time, or that I'm part of this particular community, and so forth. And so, of course, this can be very useful also in the context of academia, in order to prove that people have attended a particular workshop, or that people have attended a class, and so forth. And then there are some applications that are building upon on this non-fungible token as well, in order to create as well more advanced and more sophisticated types of certificates or badge. And so, for instance, Accredible, which is a startup that is partnering with a variety of educational, like online education systems, and enable them to issue those type of certificates or achievements, in order, again, to be able to prove that a particular student has fulfilled a particular class, or that it has acquired a particular type of knowledge, and so forth. And then if we move more into the peer-to-peer world, we have also a system, for instance, like peer-to-peer university, which have been relying a lot on the idea of like peer-to-peer learning and mutual evaluation. And of course, so it's a bit similar, for instance, from the endorsement system on LinkedIn. The problem is that because there is not a centralized entity that can verify and that can, of course, remove those endorsements if they realize that they have been illegitimately provided. In a decentralized system, it's actually much harder to verify who has issued those badges, and one needs to constantly go and contact the original issuer in order to verify that indeed it is legitimate. And so by combining this with blockchain-based badges or certificates, then it becomes possible in a more distributed manner to verify the validity of each one of those badges. And of course, it becomes kind of a system of reputation in which I will not trust the issuance of a badge by an actor if that actor doesn't have itself a series of badges that are verifying its capacity to teach something, right? So you create this kind of peer-to-peer system of badging that creates some legitimacy over some people that can then issue badges to others. And so essentially what this means is that it enables us to move towards this more granular system based on like skills, where through the whole educational journey of a particular individual or student, instead of waiting until the end of this journey, when they actually get a diploma, it is possible to actually issue a large variety of credentials and attestation all along the way for each milestone that has been achieved. And so this enabled the creation of this interconnected system of both academic and non-academic credentials that people can use to prove that they have a particular type of skills or that they have acquired a particular type of knowledge by aggregating a multiplicity of credentials from a multiplicity of sources. And of course, the higher the number of credentials, the more reliable the information is, but also the more trustworthy the sources are, then the more it is likely that people will rely on this information. And then finally, the question of interoperability, which is kind of a precondition in order for the system to actually work. So because of these, because of the property of the blockchain, because they rely on open source standard, because they provide this shared and common infrastructure, and because they have this permissionless approach, meaning that everyone can plug into this infrastructure and they can interact with it without asking permission to anyone, then those particular model of blockchain-based infrastructure could potentially provide means to unify and to streamline record keeping, in particular in the educational sector, by providing better interoperability, because the fact that everyone is actually storing those credentials on the same infrastructure automatically generate interoperability, but also by providing more opportunity for composability, meaning that people can just take all this information and plug them together into larger added value systems. And so essentially what we can see is that as more and more people actually adopt this system, as more students, employers, schools, academic institutions, etc., start using this blockchain-based infrastructure for the issues of credentials, then we can create this more uniform approach, both for tracking and for rewarding informal and informal learning, where different students can be evaluated and can obtain credentials from a variety of teachers, but also from their employers or from specific third-party accreditors or validators, and then putting all this together into this single and interoperable infrastructure for anyone to be able to verify what are the claims that they are provided, while maintaining the possibility of maintaining this selective disclosure, because by looking at the blockchain, you don't actually get any information. You can only understand what the information is when the student will show you the actual digital file, and then you can compare by looking at the hash on the blockchain that it is indeed a legitimate file. And then in terms of data portability, it is also important because to the extent that there is an actual standardized system of record and score, because all the information stays in the hand of the students, it's very easy to transfer information from one institution to the other without having to request the information from an original institution and without having to ask the next institution to verify the legitimacy of the information with the former institution, and therefore potentially increasing the mobility, again, assuming that there is a proper system of standardization in this context. And on that point, there is this an interesting example, for instance, is like the European credit transfer system, which is aimed at creating this kind of translation or transposition between the various ways in which different institutions in Europe are actually providing credits for students. And this is interesting because this is already quite, because it is already a token system, a credit system, it can very easily be implemented into a blockchain-based infrastructure where every institution can issue those ECTS token according to whatever rules have been established. And this creates an immutable record of all the credits that have been awarded. This also avoids the double spending problem in the sense that a student cannot claim twice the same credits in order to achieve a diploma faster. And potentially in those contexts in which it is possible to define algorithmically what are the credits necessary in order to obtain a particular diploma, it will also be possible to allow for the automatic issuance of those diplomas. So we are still like this is still very early on, and there is still only a very few types of proof of concept and experimentation in the sense. But there is some platforms that are actually experimenting with this, in particular for exchange students, by trying to record those kind of credit system in a standardized way via those blockchain-based credentials, in order to, on the one hand, facilitate the validation. So usually it's really complex when an exchange student goes abroad and then we collect some credits and then need to revalidate them in the home institution, but also for creating the possibility of creating joint degree program where a student can move from one institution to the other and collect credits in those different institutions and potentially re-aggregate them to the extent that they are recognized by each and other institution in order to create this joint institutional degree, depending on the credits that they have collected on different bases, and then of course being able to prove those accreditation to the employer if they look for that. And so to conclude, this actually creates the possibility of actually engaging into more granular type of curricula, where instead of having those limited set of predefined diplomas that are delivered and recognized by a few institutions, it is possible to aggregate a variety of credentials from different institutions, academic or not, in order to create ad hoc diplomas that are more suitable to the needs of a particular student, or that are actually fine-tuned to the needs of a particular employer that requests a particular set of credits or credentials. And then finally, to conclude, just because it is important to focus also on the drawbacks. So it's of course very nice and interesting to look at all the opportunities that the blockchain provides, but there is also a lot of challenges and limitations that comes with it. So the first of all is the problem of scalability. So because every single information needs to be recorded on this append-only database, it can be very costly, and a blockchain-based infrastructure is generally much slower than a centralized system. And so while there are a lot of benefits in terms of the technological guarantees that this can provide, there is also a cost, that an infrastructural cost that needs to be accounted for. And so especially when choosing whether we want to rely on a public blockchain, which has very high technological guarantees, but very high cost, or a more private or consortium blockchain, it is important to understand the scalability trade-off. There is also the question of energy consumption, which is becoming more and more relevant over time, where again, different type of blockchain have different energy consumption, and it's very important when choosing if one wants to adopt a particular blockchain infrastructure to be mindful of what are the energy costs that it might entail, and for instance, choosing whether we would rather rely on a proof of work blockchain that consumes a lot of energy, or a proof of stake or proof of authority, and so forth. And then finally, and very importantly, there is also the technology and governance risk, meaning that all the technological guarantees that a blockchain provides also constitute its own drawback, meaning that the immutability, the tamper resistant, and so forth are great when we want to ensure the integrity of information. But of course, they also cause a limitation, because that means that whenever there is an error, whenever there is a bug, whenever there is a flaw in the system, it becomes very difficult to remediate this flaw. And so sometimes we actually don't want such a strong degree of technological guarantees, because sometimes the ability of modifying a particular transaction is more important than the security that the system will never be modified. And again, especially when we decide to adopt those more consortium type of blockchain, then the governance becomes very important, because the only way in which we can ensure those technological guarantees is that the governance, the underlying governance of the blockchain network is properly managed, and therefore this becomes almost a precondition to make sure that we have designed a proper governance structure, or that we adopt a blockchain that implements a proper governance structure in order to be able to have the confidence that comes with the higher level of the blockchain infrastructure. So I think exactly 1 hour, so I will stop here. If you want to learn more, you can check out my book, which address some of this question more in detail. Yeah, I'm happy to answer a question or continue the discussion.
Thank you very much, Professor, for this really fascinating talk. So I'm supposed to moderate this little debate for the new people and new attendees. We always have about an hour of debate. So the idea is really to engage as much as possible with the scholar we invited. So I really would invite everyone. It's such a great opportunity to ask a bunch of questions in a slightly more informal way than normal conferences. So I would open the floor for any questions you would like to ask Professor De Filippi. Otherwise, I will abuse my own role and ask a couple. I see Andrea Calderaro.
Ciao, Primavera.
Hello.
Hi, Primavera. How are you? All good?
Very good.
So, so the question is, of course, you have gave a wonderful overview of a variety of issues related to blockchains, and basically you have summarized somehow what the Web 3.0 is promising. I mean, it's of course there is a big hype around the concept of Web 3.0, about the idea of decentralizing everything, etc. So for many of us that have looked at the transition between the Web 1.0 to the Web 2.0, there will be pretty much the same optimism back, I don't know, 15 years ago, something like that, where everybody was saying, okay, cool, the Web 2.0 finally will open up the web, everybody will be able to contribute to decentralize somehow the capacity to produce information, because information, that was the value back, again, 15 years ago. Now the value is data, and the Web 3.0 is the idea to decentralize the property of those data. But since we learned that actually the Web 2.0 was not that, well, it was cool, but came with lots of problems, I'm trying to look at this new transition with a bit of skepticism, and trying to be critical and trying to understand where might be the weaknesses of this transition. So, and this of course is already something that I would like you to reflect together, and trying to see to bring some criticism as well to these promises. The point is that, as you well mentioned, everything is very much based, well, or at least a potential criticism is that everything is very much based on computational capacity. Who owns more computational capacity? Do you have the capacity to contribute to create values in this new system? And of course, the computational capacity is not so equally distributed. We know that some actors do have more computational capacities than others. We are moving into the quant computing era, and this means that the possibility is that who is going to invest in the direction of gain a computational quant capacity and might create new forms of inequalities. So this is just one of the things that I've been reflecting lately, and a point, of course, that I would like to share today in this discussion. I mean, and to hear, of course, your comments that you've been working on that definitely for a long time.
Yeah, this is a little bit the core of my research. So I'm going to try to answer those two aspects. The first one about the skepticism, I think this is natural because I think it's exactly the same with the internet. There is a lot of promises, and I think those are real promises. They are possible. There is a potential world in which we could have had a very nice decentralized internet, but of course, it's not because it's possible that it's going to happen. And I think the way in which we look at the current evolution of blockchain-based system, it's pretty much replicating the same issue, which is we are noticing an increased concentration of power in specific actors. Now, at the same time, I think that it's not because it's like, I think there is a distinction to be made between the amount of centralization or decentralization, which is one question, and the democratic or non-democratic potential of the technology, and then the technical guarantees that it can provide. And whatever I presented in this talk, and I almost did it on purpose to only focus on this and not on the governance question, this is actually just very simple and basic technological guarantees, which can be achieved in any way. It can be achieved either on a public blockchain, which is extremely decentralized. They can be achieved in a consortium blockchain that is more or less decentralized, or they can potentially even be achieved in a private blockchain, right? So there's a distinction to be made about like, why do we care about using blockchain technology? And I think there is one aspect that is the disintermediation aspect, and the idea of like, we want to create systems that can bypass existing centralized operators. Or there are other applications, which is the one that I described here, which are actually more about, here are the new technological guarantees that actually institution can leverage. And so here the idea is not let's get rid of academic institution. It's more about how can existing centralized operators, trusted authority, which are academic institutions, how can they leverage this technology in order to achieve specific functionalities that will be harder to achieve today, which is like, how do you reduce the forgeability of diploma? How do you facilitate the verifiability? And potentially, how do you enable students to increase their mobility without having to constantly share personal data or moving data from one institution to the other? So for me, those are like two separate questions. One doesn't necessarily rely on the other. You can have those certified registries, which do not need to come with this promise of decentralization or with this promise of more inclusive and participatory governance, and actually could be leveraged by existing institutional framework. And I think that's so this is the core of my current ERC research, is how can we use blockchain technology not in order to bypass institutions, but how can we actually help them transition and improve their transparency, their accountability, and create more confidence in their operation, right? And that remains a centralized system, but by adopting those infrastructure into their information system, they can achieve specific technological guarantee that might make them a little bit more trustworthy, and so it becomes easier to trust them for individuals that might no longer trust them, right? So this is not a way of like, I'm not claiming anything about the Web3 here. I think the Web3 has its own evolution, and it's clearly not gonna fulfill all the promises that it has come with. I do think that it's still gonna nonetheless achieve something. I think there is a lot of potential in terms of increasing the interoperability between applications. But in this particular context of what I've tried to focus on here, it's more about just looking at what additional functionality can be identified within an existing institutional framework.
Thanks a lot for that answer. I see that Giacomo Calzolari, one of our coordinators, wants to ask a question.
Hello, Primavera. Nice meeting you. I'm an economist. Sorry, I wasn't using my camera because I noticed that the connection was not great. So thanks a lot for the presentation. Super interesting. I just wanted to ask your opinion on this. To some extent, there is strong emphasis on the ability to certify here, very much increased ability to certify. And I would like to have your view about how can we translate this ability to certify content, let's say, thinking about the academic world, into actually produce more content, novel content? So how do you transform this ability to certify into novel content? So think about the you mentioned before the academic certificate. So with this ability to certify, you can build curricula by shopping around through different institutions, building new curricula. But then how can we ensure that these new curricula that people may want to build are better than the existing one, are providing something useful that we had not in the past? So to some extent, what I'm just mentioning here is related to what you just said, concluding your previous reply to the previous question. So yes, how do we go from certification to content?
I'm not sure that the certification system can actually help in the production of content. I'm not sure blockchain can help in the production of content. I think it's more like it's more about interoperability. It's more about enabling the emergence of this more ad hoc system that can better integrate with one another. And I'm not sure what you mean by content. If by content you mean like actually content production, or whether you mean like more valuable degrees, or I don't know. I'm not sure.
Exactly.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Okay.
it. Yeah, that's the idea. So you see, to some extent, intermediaries are there because they bring something valuable. Universities can be seen as platforms and intermediaries that build up curricula on the basis of their general skills, their reputation, their experience, and this is what they. So this is one way to see how they bring value to students and to the market. So I was just thinking how this increased ability to certify may help us leveraging into better curricula.
So I think the certification is only about providing better verifiability. I don't think that the fact that we can certify things are going to lead to better curricula. I think if there is anything that could lead to better curricula is actually enabling this additional experimentation, right, in which students can aggregate different skill sets, that students can also rely on external maybe non-academic certification in order to prove that they have acquired specific skill set. And in the end, those institutions still play a role, because in the end, who is going to decide whether or not to recognize those credentials is still an academic institution, or it's going to be the employer that will decide whether or not this is valuable. And so in the end, those it's not eliminating the role of the institution. It's just providing more flexibility and more malleability, in which students can try to experiment with different credit system. And then, of course, if those credits are not recognized, they're not going to be recognized. If employers just don't want to hire those weird ad hoc students, ad hoc diploma students, then they will not hire them, and therefore, the demand will actually lead to the students to achieve whatever the employers are looking for. And so in some way, the difference is that today you actually don't really have a choice. If you want a diploma, you have to go to a particular institution and you have like different curricula that you can follow. Whereas in this context, if this model gets implemented, and if there is this level of interoperability that emerge from this ability of having this more decentralized verification and certification system, then there is more experimentation possible, and maybe a lot of this experimentation will lead to very non-valuable diploma, and students will still need to collect the credits until they actually get a proper diploma. But maybe some students will realize, well, actually, as long as my employer is okay with whatever credits I have collected. I don't need to achieve the standard diploma. I can just collect the credits that are required. Whether it's going to be better quality or not, I think it's difficult to judge, but it's providing more flexibility and more room for experimentation.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Giacomo. I guess in the end, it's always the university that can choose exactly whether to recognize that that little hash as valuable or not. No, it's just putting everything out there, and then the university makes a choice whether it's good or bad or should take into account.
The university or the employer, yeah.
Or the employer,
whoever you want to interact with.
Whoever you want, yeah. It's just showing the things, but then the decision ultimately rests on the decision maker. Giovanni has a question. Oh, sorry, Giacomo, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I mean, there is a material difference between the university and the employer. I mean, it's a completely different world. The employer, as Primavera was saying, could be completely happy with a crazy, quote unquote, crazy, let's say, completely innovative curriculum that the university never conceived. And which in the market may in the end value it as something that nobody has done before. So I think the key words is what Primavera said, is experimentation.
I think we have to wait a bit to see how universities will react to this. Maybe they will adopt this new curriculum, or they will be very conservative and just look at those specific credentials from very specific traditional universities. Giovanni, you have a question as well?
Yeah, no, I have just a short question for Primavera, but I would like first of all to thank a lot for her so broad enlightening presentation. So Primavera, no, I was thinking, you mentioned the NFT as kind of certification, and there it seems to me, I know very little of it, but it seems to me that certification makes a huge difference. So it creates value somehow that then can be exchanged. Do you think that with regard to the curricula, there is going to do something similar is going to happen? So once that you can certify things, then their value, their significance will increase or not? And the second question that I had, what kind of blockchain do you think will be used for these purposes? Because there are various blockchains that are available, if I'm not wrong. So is there going to be also a competition between blockchains for collecting this kind of emerging certification activities?
I'm not sure I fully understood the first question, so I'm going to try and answer, but if I'm not answering the question, please let me know. So I'm basically, the value of a certificate depends on whoever recognizes it as valuable, right? But you don't transfer a certificate, so it's not like a token or a cryptocurrency which I can trade on the market. Because that will make no sense that I obtain a certificate that is proving that I have a particular skill, and then I'm selling that certificate on the market. That will completely invalidate the value of that certificate. So I'm not sure what the question is. What was the question?
No, I was just comparing the NFTs with the certification of education achievement. And I think the technology is similar, but the way in which they are used is quite different.
Yeah. So the certificates, they rely on the same technology of NFTs, but so you can make either transferable or non-transferable tokens. And so the certificates most likely will be non-transferable. I mean that if someone make a transferable certificate, it probably will have no value at all. Because no one will trust, because if I can just buy my certificates, that's a common problem, but that doesn't resolve academic fraud. So the only way that you can make a credible certificate is that it's non-transferable.
Okay, thanks.
And for the second question, well, right now I don't think there is any standard or commonly accepted blockchain that will be more likely to become the established standard. In my view, I think that probably the solution will be a consortium blockchain, because the governability is very important. Like in the context, like when you have cryptocurrency, of course, like the danger of having someone making any type of hacking or frauds is so high, because there is a lot of money to be made. Then you definitely want like a extremely high security public blockchain. But in this context in which the value is not that high, like if I forge my diploma, I mean, yes, I might get into a university, but then someone might find out and then they remove my credential, right? So I think a consortium blockchain, which can be managed by a consortium of academic institution, university, whatnot, so that you do get some degree of security, because the likelihood that, you know, if you have like hundreds or even thousands of institutions that are all maintaining that consortium blockchain, it's extremely unlikely that they will collude in order to lie on a particular diploma. But at the same time, if there is a mistake, if, for instance, if a student has acquired a diploma and then you realize that he was cheating, then there is value in being able to revoke it. And if you can prove to the consortium that this was an illegitimate transaction, then the consortium can choose, okay, let's actually revoke that. Or if we realize that there is a bug somewhere and that things are not working properly, then it becomes easier to address the issue. And also within the consortium blockchain, you don't have the same problem of energy consumption. You don't have the problem of like having some people that have way more power in the network. Within a consortium blockchain, everyone is identified and everyone has the same power. And so you can actually create a particular governance structure in which every university has exactly the same power, or in which some entity have more power than other, but it's like you can actually craft your own governance, which I think in the context of education and in general, public institution, it makes a lot more sense than relying on a public blockchain, which will require, which will be very costly, and which actually come with more technological risk than the benefit that you might gain from it.
Okay, so in Primavera, since there was this little misunderstanding at the beginning, so I was not really arguing that the education certificate should be transferable. My question was whether you think that the market for education will be changed as a consequence of the possibility of having this kind of certification. So will it be a more decentralized market for education, new providers coming in? Do you have any idea what may happen?
Well, I think that, I mean, one knows, but the promises will be that things like for instance, the peer-to-peer university, or things that come from maybe non-accredited academic institution, but if they manage to somehow acquire some credibility into the ecosystem, then maybe they can become more valuable than today. So you create a possibility for additional actors to enter into the game, and of course they can issue credentials, but as long as those credentials, as long as they are not trusted into the ecosystem, those credentials will have very little value. But if they manage over time to acquire some kind of credibility, then people might be able to rely, and maybe a university can say, okay, actually, I trust the peer-to-peer university badges, or I trust the Media Lab endorsements and things like this, and therefore recognize those into their own curricula for their own students. So I think it's, I don't know if it's going to change the market. It's really hard to tell, but it creates a more permissionless system where more actors can enter into the game without having to obtain a license. But then, of course, it's not just because you issue certificate that this certificate has any value. It will always depend on the trust that people give to the person that has been issuing this certificate.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. So I think I will abuse my role as moderator if no one has questions, and just throw a couple of them to enhance the debate. The first is, what's your vision on the larger governance of Web 3.0? And I now understood by your answer to Giovanni's question that you do see some sort of maybe several consortia blockchains working together for different credibility markets? Is this the way you see, instead of having a big, massive public blockchain or several big, massive public blockchains, would we have, for example, a certain consortium blockchain for education, where a sort of privatized governance scheme where all universities enter and they are there, and so education is credible in that blockchain, and then we'll have one for the environment, we'll have one for volunteering work, and so the world will be a world of slightly regional blockchains? Or do you think that we'll just get all into a massive Ethereum or something else that might arise? That's the first question. And the second question is, in the work I'm doing, which has to do with content moderation, centralization is actually a very good thing. We want, to some extent, centralization, because we are afraid that once you lose some sort of entity that moderates a community, those communities tend to become very wild, and lots of let's say malicious content tends to, and Twitter, for example, is now working on protocols within the blockchain to try to control this somehow with the Blue Sky project. And I was just wondering if you think that there is a solution to this problem. So is it possible to have a blockchain that also to some extent curates content? So what's basically your views on content moderation and Web 3.0?
Yeah, okay, so concerning the first question, I think neither of the two alternatives you suggested. I don't think we will have one Ethereum or whatever, one single blockchain. I think that will actually be quite unlikely. I also don't think that we will have one single blockchain for various domains, like the big education blockchain and the big whatever content moderation blockchain and so forth. My view, and I think this is a little bit like how we're seeing the system evolve, is that there is a variety of blockchains that are not even specializing. There's just like there's just a lot of different blockchains that are emerging. And especially because Ethereum and Bitcoin are becoming so costly, there is kind of this trend in which you have a blockchain and then it becomes very popular. And because it becomes very popular, then all of a sudden it becomes very costly to use because the transaction fee increase, because the mining process becomes very, very difficult to engage into. And so that becomes more like this store of value type of blockchain, and then new blockchain emerge, which are much more flexible and much cheaper. And then they become more and more popular, and they start also crystallizing themselves into like becoming more expensive to use, etc. So the problem is that blockchains, at least public blockchains, they have this problem that the more popular they are, the least people want to use them. Because they become very valuable, and so of course people don't want to spend if you need to spend the cryptocurrency in order to use the blockchain, then you don't want to use the blockchain because the cryptocurrency keeps increasing in value. So there's this kind of like problem sparks in which it's like this self-defeating system, because the success of an application actually leads to the failure of this application as an application. And a lot of the tokens, like the applicative tokens, is the same problem. When you have a token that is just becomes so expensive, like if I need to go to the casino and I need to play like $200 in order to actually buy a token, and then maybe I will make $50 with that token, then I'm probably just gonna keep my token, right? So there's this problem, which I think is a problem. It's specific to public blockchain, which relies on those cryptocurrencies, which have a tendency to appreciate in value over as the adoption increase. But so the way I'm seeing the ecosystem evolve, it's more about there is a variety of blockchains that are emerging, and there is different communities, and people have a preference for one over the other. And then you have a lot of bridges that are being created. So there is this kind of interoperability that is emerging on top of those blockchains. And I think the Web 3.0 will probably be a variety of blockchains that different applications will choose to rely on one rather than the other. And then, of course, you will need to have some kind of bridges or interoperability if you want those applications to interoperate with one another. It's really hard to say whether whether there will be like one dominant player or not. I'm pretty sure there will be dominant players in the cryptocurrency sense, meaning that there will be like some very dominant cryptocurrency that have much more value than others. But at the level of the blockchain-based infrastructure, also because I'm one of those people that really believe that when the adoption of the blockchain will become institutionalized, most likely the institution will actually leverage consortium blockchain, which means that every group of institution or every institution will create its own consortium blockchain, and then you will need to figure out bridges between those. But again, that's only my view. I have no idea. And if there is one thing that I've learned about the blockchain is that the ecosystem keeps surprising you. So I'm not gonna bet into this being the case, but that's the feeling I get from observing the ecosystem. And concerning your other question, in terms of content moderation, so yes, it's actually really interesting because this is clearly there is clearly a problem in the sense that there is a lot of useless content or harmful content that can be uploaded on blockchain-based infrastructure because of the censor resistance. But that doesn't mean that you cannot moderate. It just means that you cannot moderate at the server level. But there is quite a few projects that are already existing or that are being deployed, which enable people like community-based curation or even like centralized curation that can plug into a particular decentralized infrastructure. Where, for instance, if I'm on I don't know, a blockchain-based Twitter or whatever, a social media, then, and in some way it's actually nice. It's like, this is the problem that we have today with social media, which is if I'm on Twitter or if I'm on Facebook, I don't really have a choice about how my content is being moderated. It's always the centralized operator that will choose which algorithm to apply. And I don't have the choice of saying, well, actually, I would like this filter to be applied instead of that filter. And so with a blockchain, moderation becomes user-based. So as a user, I can choose, I want to plug this particular algorithm or filter in order to decide what I should see and what I should not see. And another user could choose a different one. So of course it creates like some kind of problem in which we're not all seeing the same thing, but we're already not all seeing the same thing because all those algorithms anyhow are highly personalized. And so basically this creates more room for content moderation that can be done either by a centralized actor. I could say, well, actually I want the EUI filter on my Google Scholar, right? Or I want the Harvard filter on my Twitter, or I want a community-based filter, etc. Right? So content moderation doesn't become impossible. It just means that you cannot censor the content at the source because whatever transaction is recorded on the blockchain remains on the blockchain. But in any case, most of the content is not recorded on the blockchain. All you get is like the hash to a content, and then the content is stored on a decentralized platform like IPFS. So in any case, it's similar to peer-to-peer file sharing or decentralized network. You cannot really censor the content, but you can create user-based filtering system, which can actually be very powerful and which enable a possible flexibility of integrating different filters into the same infrastructure, because the infrastructure cannot oblige me to rely on one single filtering system.
I mean that's excellent. I think the many communities, each one having their own sort of rules of speech. It's always very compelling and has always been very compelling. I think in the history of the internet, and you read things in the 1990s, and that was the original idea, and I'm still very much drawn to that idea. But there are things I would say that you can simply not find, or it's very difficult to find on the internet. And there's a reason for that. Even if we could move from one application to the other, so we had a blockchain, a kind of Twitter blockchain, then we could move to, I don't know, a more privacy oriented blockchain or a more like sports oriented blockchain. There are things we just don't want communities to see. And that has been more or less the presumption of the internet. There is no such thing as a child pornography community anywhere. Well, there are, but once we find them, we try to take them down at the server level. And so with the blockchain, one could actually build these sort of communities. They are oriented just for malicious content or just for harmful content. And of course, many of us, I would say the totality of us here would not be part of those communities, but those communities would exist. And that might have, I think, effects on the real world. And I think that was the problem with cyber anarchism in the beginning, the 90s, was that in the end, there were specific things that we are really trying to avoid. And one of the things we're trying to avoid was this kind of harmful and malicious content. So I
agree, but I just to intervene, like the problem is in this case, like this child pornography is, you don't store child pornography on a blockchain. You store child pornography on Tor, on IPFS, on whatever darknet that you want, and then you use the blockchain perhaps to reference to it, which means that actually this is really convenient, because if you can access the blockchain, then you have this immutable reference to child pornography, which you can go and try and shut down. So I think there is this problem of like, what you can, like the immutability of the blockchain is only related to the content that you store on the blockchain, and good luck with storing child pornography on the blockchain. It's going to cost you a few thousands or I don't know, many, depending on the size of the video, but it's going to be very expensive. And I don't think, and I mean, no one has done it so far, which is perhaps a sign. There has been some history in which people have been uploading links, storing links to child pornography on the blockchain, and immediately, like, the obvious outcome is that this content has immediately disappeared from the internet or from that link, right? It's like this is the one way of actually destroying the link to this content. So I think there is this kind of misunderstanding or misconception that because the blockchain is immutable, you can store anything on it. But I think the problem of child pornography is a real problem, but it's not a blockchain problem. It's a decentralized storage network problem.
I think that's a very convincing answer. It's probably going to be easier to find them to some extent. I guess that people, their counter reaction as well, but the speech is very costless to do. So kind of all of those bubbles of harmful content with speech, it wouldn't cost you much to have these kind of communities. But anyway, the system is always the same. You're just recording hashes and not really the speech itself. I don't know if anyone else has questions to pose. I mean, this is really a fantastic opportunity to ask as many questions as you can and to understand the future of, I see Giovanni.
Now, maybe at the beginning of our conversation, there was a question concerning the fact that the blockchain may be subject to the influence of power. I was wondering, the other criticism that is sometimes raised against blockchain technology is that in the end you get a kind of anarcho-capitalism, that is people coming online, exchanging their whatever they like without being subject to taxation. They can even sell their data once you get a kind of identity system like the one that we are designing. So what do you think about this prospect? Because you spoke about the blockchain also as something, say, tools that enable institutions. How do you combine this institutional direction with this kind of anarchist approach, which is also the beginning, the root maybe of at least some development of the blockchain technologies? Yeah,
I mean, that was clearly the initial motivation for creating the blockchain, is like, again, escaping away from those non-trustworthy financial institutions, whether it is because you don't trust them because of like the financial crisis, or because you actually want to escape from the government that is going to ask you to pay taxes. And clearly, this is clearly the case, meaning that there is a lot of people that can leverage this technology in order to avoid interacting with traditional financial institutions, and therefore trying to avoid declaring their taxes to the government. It's yet one more way in which you can do some tax illusion or tax evasion. Once again, the governments are trying to tackle this problem. A lot of the on-ramps, a lot of the cryptocurrency exchange now are actually regulated and are obliged to communicate all the transactions and to KYC every single one of those users. Like most of the main cryptocurrency exchange, you cannot withdraw any of your funds without actually providing proper KYC. So the regulation obviously is coming. That doesn't mean that people cannot escape, but at least in the mainstream, it's becoming more and more difficult to transfer money, at least back and forth, from euros to crypto. Of course, you can always stay only into the crypto system, and in this case, it's actually much easier. And it's just a matter of like how the regulator decide to intervene. There are ways which I think are very dangerous as well, which is creating those white lists where you know, basically it's just a matter of like to which extent institution will interact with a wallet which has been KYC'd or not KYC'd. So you can very easily, I don't think at all it's a good idea. I think it can cause more problems than solutions, but there is like discussions about the idea of requiring all the regulated exchanges to only interact with wallets that have been KYC'd. And that means that basically, since most users rely on those centralized exchanges, they will not allow to transfer a transaction to a wallet from an external wallet that has not been recognized, what listed as a KYC account. And because most people want to interact with people that have their account in a centralized exchange, then it will limit immensely the amount of transaction you can do. Of course, it will never limit it completely, and people can still maintain their transaction in the gray area of the non-KYC wallet. But then, you know, anyhow, there is also like more and more, like people are reacting also to the increased regulation. And so now, because cryptocurrency exchange require to KYC, now you start having those mixers which enable to actually basically launder your coins in a way that actually becomes completely anonymous. So in some way, the technology will always find its way to escape from the regulation. And it's just a matter of like, to which extent do we want to create a system that is trying to block everything, or to which extent do we actually want to tackle the problem at the external level, which is, you know, you can try and trace the transaction, so everything is traceable on the blockchain. With the mixer, it becomes much more difficult. But you know, there's always ways in which people make mistake, and so it just becomes like a standard investigation. So yeah, the challenge is that as long as people decide to just use money and not rely on banks, then it's going to be very hard to regulate what's happening. If more and more people start relying on banks, and in the cryptocurrency world, banks are those centralized exchanges, then it becomes easier to regulate. And so completely, like, we have like all these thing about decentralized finance and all those new financial applications that are emerging, which are staying completely away from those centralized systems and enable clearly new ways of money laundering. It's a challenge to address, but that doesn't eliminate the value, especially in the institutional level, for people to recognize the added value that this technology provides and actually use it for their own purpose with their own consortium blockchain, while also recognizing that you can have people that are, in the same way as that there will always be people that are using the internet in order to communicate illegal content, but that doesn't mean that the internet cannot also be used for things that are extremely useful at the institutional level. So it's just a matter of like, what is the best way of regulating or reducing the opportunities for those type of activity to happen. and it's very challenging because of this intermediate nature. It's harder to regulate a blockchain-based infrastructure than to regulate an internet infrastructure because we don't have the intermediary operators. But just like Andrea was saying, as we see time passes, and we are seeing that more and more of the blockchain space is actually turning into a concentrated system with centralized operators, then we can imagine that maybe in a few years, it will become just as easy to regulate a blockchain infrastructure than it is today to regulate an internet infrastructure, to the extent that they will be centralized. And at the same time, the same question remains with like the internet and like the darknet and all those communication that still rely on the centralized infrastructure are really difficult to regulate. The difference, of course, is money, right? Is that with blockchain for the first time, we can transact with money in a decentralized manner, which of course creates a lot of new regulatory challenges.
Thanks a lot. This is great. I don't know if there are any other questions. I was reading the other day about how Section 230 came about and how senators in the beginning were discussing the future of the internet, and now we look at that, and it was not so long ago, and it's just laughable. And I imagine that in 20 years we will look at these conversations and it will be, well, this is all laughable. They had no idea what they were talking about, and things were much more simple to regulate than we initially imagined. So I'm sure things will change a lot since Web 3.0 will be a stable web for everyone. If there are no other questions, because we've been also speaking for quite a lot of time, I would just really thank Professor Primavera De Filippi. I think this was really a wonderful talk. I certainly learned so much, and I have a bunch of questions that I will try to answer in the course of my research. For everyone else, please join the next events we will have on the next Frontier Talks, and I'm sure we'll stay in touch. Professor Primavera is also working at the UI right now. I assume not physically, but working with the Robert Schuman Center. So it's also a great opportunity to reach out and continue this conversation. Once again, thank you so much, Professor, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.